Hello, Bob Rietveld here, preaching and teaching minister of the Spring Hill Christian Church of Rural Oak, Lockney, Georgia. And welcome to another lesson on Let's Study Prophecy, Bible prophecies about the second coming of Christ. Last week we finished up a whole section. There was the section 4 had three short lessons, so we just combined that into one. And today we're going to finish the last part, the last section of our study, which also contains several really short lessons. And so we're going to do a combination again as well. And so we're going to divide this into two separate days. Today we'll be talking about how prophecies, the whole section is about prophecies about the day of the Lord. And so we're going to divide this section, this final section, into two parts. The first part is going to be, we'll talk about the day, how the day begins, the resurrection of the righteous, the rapture, renovation of the universe, and the resurrection of the wicked. And so the next week, what we will do is we'll be talking about the judgment, the consummation, and the new heaven and the new earth. So we're going to go ahead and begin with how the day begins. The day will begin with some great cosmological changes. Jesus put it this way: immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn. And they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heaven to the other. That's Matthew chapter 24, verses 29 through 31. And if you remember, that was talking about the day of the Lord. In Acts chapter 2, verses 19 and 20, Peter shows that Joel not only predicted events at the beginning of the church age, but also some at the close of the church age. The Apostle John echoes these teachings about the cosmological changes that accompany the beginning of the day of the Lord in Revelation chapter 6, verse 12 and following. As the day begins, Christ will suddenly become visible in the sky, and then he will begin to descend leisurely, accompanied by the souls of the righteous dead and by the angels. Paul tells us, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 16, that the coming of Christ will be heralded by a shout, by the sounding of a trumpet, and by the voice of the archangel. Shout is a word that pictures the order which an officer shouts to his troops, or a hunter to his dogs, or a charioteer to his horses. And so we picture some shouted command being given by Jesus as he leaves heaven. A trumpet blast at the second coming of Christ is very fitting. In the Old Testament, when God came down, as it were, to meet his people, this meeting was announced by a trumpet blast. See Exodus chapter 19, verses 16 and following. Also, the trumpet was used as a signal of Jehovah's coming to rescue his people from hostile oppression. Zephaniah 1:16, Zechariah 9:14. And from all of this, it's abundantly clear that the Lord's second coming will be open, public, and not only visible to all, but also audible to all. The passage does not say, but it would seem that the voice is the order given by the ruler of angels to the other angels to gather the harvest. Christ's becoming visible is to be a sudden thing. Numerous verses speak of his coming as being like a thief. For example, 1 Thessalonians 5:2, His descent will be visible, Revelation 1:7, and it will be majestic, 2 Thessalonians 1:7. His descent toward the earth seems to be a leisurely descent. It will be such that every eye shall see him, and perhaps this means that the world will turn once on its axis as he returns. It will last over enough time that the righteous will have time to be caught up to meet him and then accompany him on the remainder of his descent. See 1 Thessalonians 4:17. Excuse me. As he returns, Christ is accompanied by the souls of the redeemed. 1 Thessalonians 4:14 and 3:13. Perhaps also Jude, verse 14, is a verse referring to the same thing, though the holy ones, there could be the angels. At death, the souls of the righteous had gone to be with Christ in heaven. Philippians chapter 1:23, Revelation 6:9 and following, and Hebrews 12:1 and following about the great cloud of witnesses. Now, those disembodied souls accompany Jesus as he returns, and shortly they will receive their resurrection bodies. Christ is also accompanied by the angels as he descends from heaven, 2 Thessalonians 1:7, Matthew 25:31, and again perhaps Jude verse 14. Thus the day of the Lord begins. The cosmological changes that begin before Christ's manifestation are but part of the changes that will reshape the appearance of the universe. The man of lawlessness is destroyed at the first gleam of Christ's appearance, 2 Thessalonians 2:8, as we talked about last week. And after his sudden appearance, Jesus begins his descent toward the earth. One of the distinctive features of premillennialism is that it teaches there to be several resurrections, with the wicked to be raised at least 1,000 years after the righteous. Though we've failed to find convincing proof of a millennium, we still may hold that the resurrection of the righteous takes place before the resurrection of the wicked. And reasons for this conclusion will be given in just a little while. And so Paul teaches that the righteous shall be raised at the second coming of Christ. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 23, and 1 Thessalonians 4:16. He also teaches that the resurrection of the righteous takes place before the rapture. 1 Thessalonians 4:17. One of the questions treated by Paul in his first letter to the Corinthians was, how are the dead raised up? And with what body do they come? That's in 1 Corinthians 15:35. And he goes on to explain about the resurrection bodies, showing that there is a close relationship between the body that was laid in the grave and the spiritual body that shall be raised from the grave. There is a dissolution, but continuity, that there is diversity, but identity between the former and the latter. So according to 1 Corinthians 15:52, after the trumpet sounds, the souls who are accompanying Jesus as he returns will be reunited with their resurrection, will be united with their resurrection bodies. Isn't that the mental picture that we get that of a meeting in the air of the souls descending from heaven and the new bodies ascending after a resurrection from the grave? It would appear that Luke 14:14, where the language resurrection of the just appears, is to be understood as speaking of this resurrection of the righteous. Revelation 11:11 has shown that the resurrection of the righteous follows the 3.5 days when the bodies of the witnesses were left lying in the streets. If our identification of the two periods is correct, then it can be said that the resurrection of the righteous follows the little season. Because of the resurrection of their bodies is an incorruptible, powerful, glorious form. The saints will be clothed with bodies, their resurrection bodies. 1 Corinthians 15 verses 51 and following. And they receive their resurrection bodies as Jesus is descending. These resurrection bodies are going to be glorious. They will be just like the body Jesus now has. Philippians chapter 3 verses 20 and 21. They will be unlimited by space or time, just as Jesus was unlimited by locked doors and windows after his resurrection. And so we have here, after the day begins, we have the resurrection of the righteous. Then we have the rapture. The word rapture is not found in our English versions of the New Testament, but the idea that it expresses is clearly taught in passages such as 1 Thessalonians 4:13 through 17, 1 Corinthians 15:51 through 53, and in passages like Matthew 24 verses 40 and 41, which speak of one shall be taken. The rapture is a word to express what Paul said about the righteous being caught up in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. When Christ returns, there will be righteous people living on earth. Before they're taken up to be with Christ, their bodies will be changed so they are just like the resurrection bodies that the Old and New Testament saints received at the resurrection of the righteous that we just talked about. This change will be sudden. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, 1 Corinthians 15:51 and 52 says. The living saints will not see death, but will simply be transformed into their new bodies. The teaching about a rapture of believers was not something first taught by Paul after being given a revelation on the subject. Christ himself spoke on the subject during his earthly ministry. He said, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may be also. John 14:3. The wicked, both the living, those living and those in the graves, will be left behind when the rapture takes place. You can study the scriptures, the truth will become evident. Revelation 11, 12, and 13, Revelation 6:15 and following, Revelation 16, 17 and following, and Matthew 24 verses 40 and 41, which asserts one shall be left. Some premillennialists anticipate a secret rapture. It's held that the only evidence the world will have of the rapture will be that the sudden and utter disappearance from the world of those who are caught up. Appeal is then made to Acts chapter 1:11 for proof, from which it's argued that only the disciples saw him go. Only believers will see him return at the rapture. Appeal is also made to the thief coming passages as proof of a secret rapture. But examination of the thief coming passages shows that the suddenness and unexpectedness of the coming is the thing that is emphasized and not the silence and secrecy. For example, observe closely what's said at 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 verses 1 through 4. Does this passage carry the idea of secrecy? It certainly does not, unless sudden destruction following on wicked men is a secret thing. And it seems foolish to even raise the question of secrecy in connection with 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 10 through 12, even though it is one of the thief coming passages. Finally, we affirm that Acts 1 speaks of the manner of Jesus' departure and return, and not the audience who will see it. How can one claim the rapture is a secret thing when we are told in 1 Thessalonians 4 that it will be heralded by a trumpet? a shout and the voice of the archangel. How can one claim the rapture is secret or a secret thing when in Matthew chapter 25, verse 1 and following, both wise and foolish heard the midnight cry? And so we conclude that the rapture is not a secret, silent thing that will then be followed by a period of a literal 1,000 years, but the rapture is the actual second coming of Christ when the righteous are caught up to meet the Lord in the air at his second coming. Then we have the renovation of the universe. The cosmological changes which began the day of the Lord will continue until the whole universe is renovated. That the universe is to be renovated rather than annihilated is evident from the following scripture. Romans chapter 8, verses 15 through 25. Verse 21 tells of the creation being set free from the bondage to which it was subjected at the fall, and thus obtaining to the glorious liberty of the church or the children of God. Now, liberty cannot be one thing for the creation, annihilation, and another, the glories of a new life in heaven for the children of God. Now, Romans settles the question. The Bible teaches renovation, not annihilation of the universe. And note in passing that this renovation takes place when the sons of God are revealed, verse 19. That is at the second coming, the parousia, or as verse 23 has it, at the time the saints get their resurrection bodies. And then in 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 7, 10, and 12, Peter teaches us that the renovation will take place by fire. Verse 8 indicates it is a day of the destruction of ungodly men. Verse 10 says the elements shall be dissolved with fire, and the earth and its works, wicked works, shall be burned up. Verse 12 tells us that the renovation of the universe takes place at the parousia, the catching up of the righteous. Emphasis should also be placed on the word new in the phrase new heavens and new earth, 2 Peter 3:13 and Revelation 21 verse 1. Two Greek words are translated new in our Bibles. One is neos. It means new, never having been existed before. The other is kainos. It means fresh or new in quality or different character. Now, the new heavens in which dwelleth righteousness is kainos, the latter, not new in point of time, not neos, but renovated, fresh, clean by the fires of renovation. What we're saying is that the renovation of the universe does not seem to be an instantaneous thing. It would appear that some time is going to pass between the time of the cosmological changes begin and the time that they are finished. During this passage of time, Christ will appear and begin to descend. The resurrection of the righteous will transpire. The rapture too will occur. And some of the wicked left behind after the rapture will be killed by the catastrophic changes. Revelation 11:13. Then we have the resurrection of the wicked. The resurrection of the wicked dead would seem to follow the rapture. We've seen that wicked people are killed in the cosmological changes that follow the rapture, Revelation chapter 11, verses 12 and 13. And we shall see that the wicked people are present at the time, or for the time of judgment. Further, the Bible teaches that all the dead shall be raised from the dead. Daniel 12:2, Revelation 20, verse 11 and following, and 1 Corinthians 15:21 and 22. Putting these all together, it would seem that the resurrection of the wicked follows the rapture. Several other passages are a little easier to understand if it be true that the resurrection of the wicked take place at a time different from the resurrection of the righteous. Paul's statement in Philippians 3:11 about attaining to the resurrection from the dead might speak of his desire to be a part of the resurrection of the righteous. It certainly means more than simply looking forward to a resurrection, for even the wicked will be raised. Should Paul have the resurrection of the body in mind as he writes, the passage makes good sense only if there are separate resurrections for the righteous and the wicked. It makes little sense if the two are raised at the same time. The verse in Acts chapter 24, verse 15 about a resurrection both of the just and the unjust is quickly understood if the resurrection of the wicked is at a different time from the resurrection of the just. And further, we have the language resurrection from the dead and resurrection of the dead, which might suggest that the righteous are raised from, in other words, out of the midst of the dead, leaving some, the wicked. And we're quick to admit that the usage of the phrases in question is not in and of itself decisive proof of separate resurrections for the just and the unjust, but it is certainly in harmony with that idea. The resurrection of the wicked is a subject which little is said in the Bible. It's made clear that they will be raised, for what we lost in Adam, we gained in Christ. Romans 5:15 and following, in 1 Corinthians 15:22. But whether or not they lose their resurrection bodies after the judgment, the second death, and whether or not the living wicked at the time Jesus comes will also be changed, as are the righteous, are subjects about which the word really implies little, meaning the Bible. In any case, once all the dead have been raised, then begins the final judgment. And that's when we're going to stop, is right there. Next week, we're going to be finishing up our study. We're going to be talking about the judgment, the consummation, and then the new heaven and the new earth. And so I invite you to join me next week for our final lesson on what the Bible says about prophecy concerning the second coming of Christ. And so I hope you have enjoyed this lesson and this series as much as I have in presenting it to you. I hope you have a great rest of the week, and may God bless you.